So I'm at SLAV.
All right, this is Shit Spouter 37.
This is Black.com pilled.
This is the Fed Post.
Just dive on in and just kind of see where it gets relevant to cut in.
Yep.
And go from there.
Yep.
Sounds good.
I had seen in your bio, former reporter, right? Recovering reporter, or
Yeah, I was a newspaper reporter.
Gotcha. So what's sort of your background on that? Like, how involved were you in all that?
I kind of came into it in a weird way. I studied politics in college, worked in like Republican campaigns, like on staff and stuff when I came out of college. And then a couple of years later, had a friend who happened to work at a local newspaper, and they were missing their politics guy. They'd moved on to, I think, Politico or something. And so he was the sports guy, but he got stuck doing the politics, and he didn't want to do it anymore. And he's like, "Hey, I've read some of the stuff you've been posting online, and I know you know about politics. You want to try covering one of these things?" And
Nice.
Yep, a bunch of freelance articles later, I ended up as a senior staff writer.
Oh, nice. So you haven't been doing that recently, or you?
No, I'm no. That's the recovering journalist part.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm done with that for now. But I was doing that for a number of years. I was covering politics and crime.
Politics, crime.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And you've since gone through the 12 steps afterwards.
Yeah. I'm trying to, I've made amends. I'm saying sorry to people I've hurt, relying on a higher power. That kind of stuff.
Did you ever vie for that blue check? I don't know the process. We know a couple blue checks. I don't know what the process is, or whatever. But you ever vie for that?
No, and my stuff was all local. So like I had a couple stories on Trump came into town and for a rally and that kind of thing. So I covered some stuff, but I never wrote for any really big publications. I was more of a beat reporter. Yeah, I was covering what are the new taxes going to be in the local fire districts?
Right. So. I remember Peter Coffin had been on here. He just got it off some random HuffPo articles or whatever. Like, I don't even know how easy it is to get. Like, maybe we could all get it. I have no idea.
Oh yeah, I think it's probably ultimately a lot less work than actually just doing honest to God reporting. It's I think he just wrote a couple opinion random
which anybody could write. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the way most of your big sites work today is you're just taking whatever's off the AP wire. Like, very few people have actual reporters in the field. So you really only have a few people who are actually writing eyewitness news. And then it's about a billion sites all recycling it and slapping new ads on it.
Right.
Everything's factory.
Everything's an aggregate now.
Yeah, 100%. Everybody thinks they're a genius because they copy pasted somebody's story and wrote a blurb for it and reapplied their ads. So
right. Well, so you don't have to give us the exact. You don't even have to give us the state or whatever. But what region was this at? Was it in the Midwest? Or
I'm in the Southeast.
Southeast, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What made you give it up or just move to something different? What?
It's a mixture of things. It's definitely an interesting job for sure, but it's wildly unstable, and everything is closing down and consolidating. Most companies are being bought up. That's what happened to the paper I was at. They got consolidated, and they just closed one of their offices. And I was like, okay, I got to get a job where, I'm not a month away because it's getting married and stuff. And it's okay, I actually need a regular source of income where they're not just going to fold up one day because someone decided to, they can get better ad revenue somewhere else.
Gotcha. Interesting. So, well, this is interesting in general, just because we don't get a lot of right wingers on our show. I've been trying to get more right wingers on. Last was Jeannie, and we just get people sort of in the gray area. Not to pigeonhole you to anything, but definitely been looking to talk to more people who are who associate with the right generally. So definitely glad to have you on. I sort of I personally don't know shit about neo-reactionary thought. Like I don't really, like, I've only been online like maybe like a year or two, so like I just don't understand the like the divides among the right that well in general. Jeannie was on explaining some of it, but that's all new to me. I know SLAV has said like recently that he was reading some neo-reactionary stuff, and that sort of made you, would you say, SLAV, that was making you reconsider like church and all that?
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess before I make any assumptions, like, I was just wondering if you could like just give like what you
how do you define neo-reaction? Insofar as one, I guess, maybe could answer that question.
Sure. So it's probably worth making sure that we like make a distinction between neo-reactionary political analysis and then like the stuff that neo-reactionaries tend to believe and talk about, because they're kind of separate, because neo-reactionary political analysis is just like a set of tools to look at the way power works. And then those of us that tend to write or discuss or, like make content around that stuff have a kind of a similar, outlook, like definitely kind of more right wing, a lot of trad caths, traditional Catholics and stuff in there. But it's not exclusive to that. It's like I said, it's like picking up a hammer and saying the hammer's right wing, right? It's just a hammer. Right. You could use it however you want.
Right.
First thing that immediately comes to mind, parallel on the left would be Marxism.
Right. I was
thinking the same.
You talk about Marxism. You tell 1,000 people, or you ask 1,000 people to define Marxism, you're going to get 1,000 different answers.
Right. You might get a bunch of retards who claim to be Marxist, but Marxism itself can be functionally very useful.
Well, you'll get 999 retards.
Right. But the point, but the point being that Marxism can be like a hammer, like the way, like, CWH just talked about it, just like it can be useful.
Well, that's what people say about Buddhism as well. Like real actual Buddhists would be like, Buddhism is just like a set of teachings and principles. So I think that's really like a parallel you can see a lot of different areas.
Sure.
But as far as like with Marxism, that's specifically like, and that's how I guess I probably would describe it, or how I use it, because like I don't really like to cling to particularly identifying with that as a political identity, or really identifying as any type of political thing as an identity. But really, it's just kind of just information you can use and process the things around you however you want, Right.
Instead of these,
sounds like the same kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like instead of these things being tools that people can pick up and use and apply, people take it as like costumes or whatever, or just like, I need the Marxist starter pack or the neo-reactionary starter pack or whatever. Like,
I need to hop on the dogma quick.
Yeah. And like, just cosplay these things. But what do you think those tools are in your mind? Like what exactly, like what does that mean to you?
Sure. So when most people talk about like reactionary philosophy, they're usually talking about, and not in the Marxist way directly here, but when you're talking about reactionary philosophy, you tend to talk about people who are kind of anti-Enlightenment or very Enlightenment skeptical. And so if you look at some of the earliest guys, you're probably looking at guys like Joseph de Maistre or Thomas Carlyle, and they're the ones who are kind of looking at they're kind of writing as things are going on, late 1700s, early 1800s, and everything's getting adopted and applied. And they're saying, look, guys, there's a lot of problems here. This doesn't actually map onto reality the way you want it to. And we're all going to pay a cost if we like order society under this set of assumptions. And so neo-reactionary thought is really just kind of picking up a lot of those tools and dusting them off and saying, the story of the Enlightenment is kind of bunk, and pretending that like humanity suddenly became this hyper-rational animal magically, and everything like became very logical and cold and analytical is kind of ridiculous. And if we assume that, maybe we can go back and take a lot of those like understandings of power and how it flows and how it's used by the state and other actors inside the state, and maybe we can apply those things onto our current situation and see if that explains stuff that otherwise doesn't make sense in kind of our current current, liberal democratic framework. And so a lot of neo-reaction is borrowing very heavily from kind of the Italian elitist school, guys like Moscow or Prado. James Burnham is a guy who updated a lot of this stuff and is a big influence. Guys like Bertrand de Juvenal are big contributors to kind of this thought of kind of who actually drives power and what actually determines who's in charge in any given society.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So sort of. So what I can glean from that is sort of like a rejection of like classical liberalism, like what I guess some of these IDW people will claim of just sort of like that period, that alone. Like I guess there's certain right leaning or independent people who will claim classical liberalism or whatever. But this is sort of even before that. This is saying that even that is rejecting even that school of thought, like even further back.
Yeah, you're definitely looking at people who are very skeptical of democracy and liberalism in general. It's a lot of people who really, when they look at the current political landscape, the things that we call right are really just one half of liberalism in America. Especially, we kind of just cracked liberalism in half and put one half of it in the Democrat pile, one half in the Republican pile. And so I think the terms left and right are useful. But if you just have it stuck in your head like GOP right, you're definitely barking up the wrong tree when you're talking about like neo-reactionary thought. Right.
I think anybody with clear eyes could see that as far as the two parties, the GOP and the DNC are sort of two wings of the same like neo-libcon order. That's pretty clear. So I guess what we've talked about on the show before is sort of like, well, Slav has said this before too, of just like, they've gotten rid of all the good parts of liberalism and kept all the bad parts or heightened all the bad parts, in that personally, I don't reject all the tenets of basic liberalism. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like classical liberalism. Like, I don't have an issue with democracy or those things like that. But what just for somebody who just has no idea, like for me, for instance, like what are the arguments basically in terms of like why this needs to be rejected or why this was a whole wrong path we just walked on for centuries and just led to where we're at now?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess the biggest thing that you probably want to look at is the thing that is probably the takeaway most people have from neo-reaction is the cathedral model.
Right. Slav has mentioned this. Yeah. Right. Moldbug, right? Had talked about this.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Moldbug, Mencius Moldbug, or Curtis Yarvin, he's writing under his real name now. He's definitely the father of neo-reaction. You have a lot of other guys like Nick Land, Spandrel, who are pretty essential to it. And that's the other thing about neo-reaction. It's a loose collection of blogs. It's there's no formal doctrine. There's no there's no official canon. The church has not laid down Vatican II or whatever. Like, there's nothing like that. So what you're really looking at is basically Mencius Moldbug and the people who wrote stuff reflecting on what he wrote. But the thing that's very popular is the cathedral model. It's so popular now, you'll even hear Fox News hosts talk about it, which is, yeah. Like a couple of times Fox News hosts have mentioned it, which is they don't use it right. So it's going to become meaningless soon. But
Slav had mentioned
it. Like things do.
Yeah. This happens to everything.
That's how they start. The absorption has begun.
Yeah. No, we're smack dab in the co-opt phase.
Right.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to you.
I'm just happy, maybe I can cash in and grift. I don't know.
Hey man, dust off that old newsboy hat, right?
I've got a couple power ties back from my working in politics days. I can still do this, right?
Get the blue check and all that. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Slav had mentioned the cathedral a year ago. I remember he had told us like we need to just get like basic understanding of, and honestly, like I kind of missed what the basics of it were, honestly. Like, I have a general idea, but like how would you guys explain that to someone who doesn't know what it is, basically?
Yeah, so the cathedral is basically the decentralized consensus-making apparatus in a society. So when you're running something on monarchy, like it's pretty clear whose opinion matters, right? Like the monarchs and maybe some nobles and some people in the church, but power is very clear. It's very direct. It's very concentrated. Accountability mechanisms might be low, but accountability visibility is high, right? You know who to blame. When we're looking at democracy, when we're looking at liberal democracy, we're looking at a system which is supposed to feature popular sovereignty. And I'm probably not telling you guys anything new here, but the key to controlling popular sovereignty is controlling what people think. So if you want to control democracy, you're not going to gauge the opinion of people. You're going to control the opinion of people. That's how it works. And so what the cathedral model is trying to answer is, obviously we look at something like the Soviet Union. And, the example that Moldbug always likes to use is he talks about this journalist who used to work in Germany, right? And he's this Jewish journalist in Germany in the 1930s. And he has a subscription to a cat magazine. And then he notices that through the 1930s, slowly the articles about cats start to become about the German cat. And so it's very clear that something is going on, right? Like all of culture suddenly is not just talking about what it's supposed to be talking about. It's talking about that in the context of the state ideology. And so when you have something like, the Soviet Union or something, who's doing it. It's the Politburo, right? Like you have an official organ that tells people, what's going to go into publications and that kind of thing. Well, if we look at Western media, especially U.S. media, the New York Times, Harvard, the unelected bureaucracy, the entertainment media, they all seem to kind of be moving in the same direction. Sometimes it's one's a little bit behind the other, but it's funny that you never see Yale and Harvard and the New York Times and all these different places disagree with each other. And if there's no central organ that is dictating who's doing this, then we need to understand why we see this phenomenon even in a society that doesn't have that overt central organ. And so the answer for neo-reactionaries is the cathedral. And the cathedral is the collection of consensus-making apparatus in the United States and therefore the wider Western world. It's your news media, it's especially your universities, your unelected bureaucrats inside government agencies that aren't accountable to voters.
TikTok. All this shit, all this nightmare shit.
Your influencers.
Exactly.
And so when you're looking at this, the reason that they all tend to work together is that they all went to the same church. They all went to the same cathedral.
Right.
Their morals are more or less dictated from kind of their time in college. Anybody who's going to be a middle manager or an upper class manager, anybody who's going to lead an NGO or a government organization or become a general or write newspaper articles, they all have to go to the same elite universities, and they all eat together and date each other, and they basically it serves the exact same function as a cathedral in the Middle Ages. And so that's exactly. And so that's where neo-reaction is going with the cathedral, is that there's always this push in a similar direction, and it's always progressive morality. And because, like any morality, progressivism is self-reinforcing, everyone is looking to make sure other people are on board. So your government bureaucrat is checking to make sure your business leader is complying with diversity quotas, and then your New York Times writer is writing articles about how diversity quotas aren't strict enough, and then your NGO is working to lobby the government to make sure that we have higher standards, and it's just a self-reinforcing purity spiral that's always pushing us continually in one direction, even though there's not one specific organization that's in charge.
It always reminds me of the classic what was it, a Colbert line of him saying like what did he say? It's like, the funny thing is that reality tends to have a liberal bent. just like it would just like, of course, just like as Zizek would say or something, just like just pure ideology, just pure, and almost in the model you're laying out, like in this kind of fucked up way, like what he's saying is kind of true. It's just that, I mean, it's his reality. But like, of course someone like that would say a thing like that.
Well, I think he's even right. So
yeah,
one of the things we talk about is the left as entropy. You think as standards,
Cthulhu swims to the left.
Cthulhu swims left. He swims slowly, but he always swims left. And so one of the things is that you're incentivized to always move in that direction. This is why the history of the arc of history is long, but it bends towards
justice, right.
at least
Justice,
their idea of justice.
Right.
I think that's actually true to some extent, because there is a natural process that pushes opinion in that direction. Every time you have an opportunity, every time you have disagreement, there's an opportunity to rule. And anytime you can create a purity spiral, you can capture more power. And that's what really these organs are all trying to do. They're all in competition for power. So they're all busy trying to prove that they are the ones who should be driving this train wherever it's going. And that's why you constantly see them swimming in the same direction.
So the natural response to this is, and this is sort of harkening back to like our earlier episodes when we talked a little bit more theory, is sort of this hard authoritarianism versus soft authoritarianism, where they get consent. I mean, to me, it was always like a Huxleyan thing versus an Orwellian thing. Like it's like they get you to want what they want. You know what I mean? They get it organically in terms of the Huxleyan way and the soft authoritarianism. But so the response to that is to be like, oh, it's preferable for it to be, I guess they say that Moldbug is for monarchy. I don't really know his views, but that's the caricature of them. So,
yeah, what would you say that neo-reactionaries, like, do you think that oftentimes many of them lean towards being pro-monarchy or like being like neo-monarchist type people, or is it more so just like what is the alternative to like the one that's most often pitched by neo-reactionaries, or is there often not one by people who are actually creating this theory?
So Moldbug, especially in his early work, wrote a lot about Neocambralism, which is basically taking, taking somewhat of a monarchy model, taking a CEO and making him, king, of small states. It's not a great idea.
Amazon Valley.
Yeah, it's
right.
Funny because we're probably closer to that than most people would like.
Right. Oh yeah,
right.
I mean, because it happened down in Nevada. They already passed the law that we've talked about before, but to allow like tech companies to form their own municipalities. If they are able to pledge that they'll bring X amount of revenue over X amount of time.
Yeah, so this is why efficiency brain is always going to murder your society, no matter how smart you are. And while I respect Moldbug deeply, he's a wild autist, and so you have you really have to take that into account. I would say the one thing that definitely binds all people who are using the NRX lens, whether they lean monarchy or neocambralism or something else, is they want an increase in formalism. We want the connection between power, authority, and therefore accountability to be clear. We want to know who's in charge. We want to make it very clear what the rules are, and we want to make it clear who's to blame if they fail. One of the things democracy is really good at is making sure that you blame your neighbor for something the elites fucked up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it sounds familiar given the last year or two.
Yeah, COVID.
So, yeah, well, the key is to make sure that your neighbor in the MAGA hat who repipes people's houses for a living is the person who destroyed America, not the guy who sent your job to China. Right. Or to make sure that the guy down the road who's joined a union was the one who destroyed America, and not the people who are wasting all of your money fighting someone in the Middle East. And so by making sure that, no one is ever held accountable, because really at the end of the day, the people are sovereign, right? And so they're the ones making the decisions, then there's really no way to ever hold any individuals really feet to the fire. And because power is so wildly distributed inside the government anyway, way, even if you do actually manage to hold some segment of the government accountable, you're just cutting one head off the Hydra. You didn't actually do any kind of serious damage. So while we are reflexively worried about consolidations of power, one of the things that consolidations of power does is makes it clear to the ruled who the ruler is, and makes it clear who to blame when things go wrong.
Well, it almost seems like a perfect segue then to immediately, maybe this is dumb, but immediately ask, what are your thoughts on China?
I was literally about to ask that. Yeah.
Because this topic kind of comes up a lot, just amongst us.
And like Logo, like and Mold, like he also, I believe, like takes a lot of heed to Molebug, and it seems like people of that school of thought are pro-China, which now that you've explained this Cathedral thing to me in very clear way, it makes perfect sense why China would be a good model society. But what are your personal thoughts on China?
So I certainly wouldn't want to live in China.
Sure.
And so
it's an outstanding start.
And so I'm not going to tell anybody that China's a superior model. I think that's pretty silly. I do think that there are a number of things that China does do better than we do. And I think that there are a lot of lessons to learn there. China has a whole lot of its own problems. It's got a demographic bomb that's just waiting to go off in any time. And so I think people who are saying, yeah, China, we got to get on that real quick are being pretty silly. But
what do you mean demographic bomb?
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
I mean, they made sure that there are way more men than women.
The one-child
and
policy.
Right. Yeah. You're going to have a lot of lonely, angry men dying childless.
Incel. Yep. We've seen this story. Yep.
And you have to crush the Muslim population because they're going to outbreed you.
Really? They've got fertility rates like that? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the many reasons they were going after the Uyghurs.
Really?
Is,
traditional values, they be fucking.
Yeah. Exactly. It's kind of the inverse of what most people think of that. So, yeah.
Yes, God wants you to fuck your wife. That's kind
of true. Yes, absolutely. 100%. Wives, yeah. It's very clear in the Bible and other books, other holy books. I'm not sure why that's so hard for people. But yeah, no, it's one of those situations where I do think it's kind of embarrassing when you see some people like really get excited about China just because they do some things correct. But I would not sell that as some kind of great model to follow. There are pieces to pick up from it, but I wouldn't say it's anything approaching the answer. Though at this point, in some ways, its government does make far more sense than our own.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Go ahead, Sioj.
I was just going to say, like, with what you're explaining so far with like neo-reactionaryism or whatever I guess you'd call it, is there an ism at the end there as like a school of thought?
Not really, because like I said, neo-reaction's more of a set of tools.
Okay, cool.
So people have very different goals with what to do with neo-reaction.
So is it mostly about political organization and state organization? Is there an economic aspect to it that...
It's definitely coming from the Austrian school. Moldbug was himself a libertarian before he kind of fell off that wagon via Hoppe. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Hans Hermann Hoppe.
No,
but
no.
There's a strain of libertarianism that's straight up monarchical.
What?
Yeah. So if you're
is this sort of like how forgive us because you're like the you're like the right wing teacher coming in on leftoid, on leftoid. So you are collectively red pilling our audience too. But
understood.
Is this kind of similar to how libertarianism kind of like in the States is a hell of a lot different than what libertarianism would be kind of in like Europe? Is that kind of what you're...
Yeah, well, I mean, libertarianism is a mess. It's I mean, Bill Maher calls himself a libertarian, and so does like Greg Gutfeld on Fox News. So
and Noam Chomsky.
Right. If you're all about me, then yeah, everybody's gonna have a different me explanation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Actually,
That's pretty well said, honestly.
but one of the things about libertarianism is there is a wing of libertarianism that understands that actually what you need is like really strict, straight control to generate a libertarian environment. Because if you don't have someone who's enforcing those things top down, humans don't actually respond that way. And so there is this strain of that. It's not where I come from, but
so it's
but
like
it definitely exists in there.
Create a place where free will is safe to have, kind of idea.
Yeah, you have to force like certain boundaries onto a society before it can maintain a certain level of liberty, which is actually ironically like what the founding fathers of America said. Right. But everybody forgets that part.
I mean, to be completely honest, this sounds like a lot of communists.
It's fucking horseshoe theory, bro. It's fucking, you need the Leviathan to have real libertarian society, right?
I mean, to be clear, this is libertarian authoritarianism, if it helps.
Right.
If that makes any sense to you.
Sure.
But you will see most InterX people are leaning more towards the authoritarianism side, even though they favor libertarian economics.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So how does one square like libertarian economics without libertarian social values? Because to me, like being able to have that, like that creates a lot of the markets and stuff like that. Like being able to have that cycle of like creating new identity and like individual liberty stuff that people can do creates new markets that then can be capitalized on through the like, you know, a libertarian economy where people don't have regulations and stuff like that. So how exactly does one square that? Yeah.
So this is where, like I said, understanding neo-reaction as a model of power as opposed to a political prescription is really useful.
Gotcha.
Because the answer is, I think for a lot of people, it doesn't square. It doesn't square for me. I'm not an economic libertarian.
Gotcha.
I don't think that's the way it should work. I'm certainly not a communist either. But I think that just unbridled what we call capitalism, which
free market,
I don't think has a lot of meaning anymore. It's just a magical word.
Right.
But the things people think of when they think of capitalism, I think are extremely destructive to especially traditional family structures. Sure. And any society that has anything approaching what I want, which is kind of a more Christian orientation, is going to need to put a very good sized bit in the mouth of capitalism to steer where it wants it to go. But like I said, that's why you want to separate neo-reaction from its adherents, because I think you'd hear that from a lot of neo-reactionaries. A lot of them are, like I said, traditionally Catholic. In fact, one of the guys who's most famous for popularizing Moldbug is called the Distributist, because he's a Catholic distributist.
Okay, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yes. And so I think that's where a lot of them would like to go, but that doesn't really tie into neo-reaction proper as a theory.
This also kind of seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about this more libertarian economic approach. This almost kind of sounds like this is where the road kind of leads to Nick Land and getting into accelerationism a little bit. Is that
sure? So, do you guys want to run through accelerationism real quick?
Sure.
I mean, hell, man, this is your lesson, right?
Yeah. I'm mad curious.
Follow the lesson plan.
Like I said, I don't want to monopolize everything. I don't want to just be like, here, I've come on to explain, for 3 hours.
You're a monarch today.
I'm straight curious.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, like we were talking earlier, this is where it is kind of like a more laxed structure and everything. Like, dude,
we lack the formalism needed.
Terrible state structures. You'd never make it.
It'd be awful.
So Nick Land is interesting because he's like this super Marxist philosopher, like slamming a lot of heroin in like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Right.
I fuck with Nick Land.
And so Nick Land is like brilliant when he's coherent. But one of the things that he does is he reads a lot of like Deleuze. And then he marries it on to some of the neo-reactionary stuff. So he writes this famous post responding to Moldbug called The Dark Enlightenment, which is something you might hear like NRX referred to as the Dark Enlightenment because it was that popular. And I really, really, like, if you want to read something really fascinating and you're like from the left, you might want to read that just because it's a guy who used to be very left-wing and filtering a lot of those ideas through.
Who is this?
But Nick Land.
Okay. He used to be a leftist? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, very much.
Really?
Yeah, he was like associated with Mark Fisher and everything.
He was writing essays about how feminism was essential to destroying the family, so Marxism could more efficiently spread across country borders.
Right. And then of course, right, that the guy who's most from the left wing becomes like the most misanthropic person.
He as he said many times, like I just hate the left that much. Like I'm not really right. I just hate the left that much.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of us.
Yeah, that's just us.
I don't blame you, Nick. I don't blame.
You too might move to China and start taking heroin. Who knows? But yeah, so Nick Land comes up with this theory of accelerationism, and basically, again, none of this will come as a shock to you as guys who have read Marx. But he says basically, basically you have proto-capital in traditional societies, and the traditional societies act as graphite containment rods in a nuclear reactor. The structures control the capital and allow it to be good, kind of be used for the good of society. But once modernity comes by, it strips out those graphite rods. And once that happens, the capital reaction starts. And there's really no way to stop it once it starts. And so what you end up in is, of course, the scenario where your technology excites your market forces, which accelerates your technical growth, which accelerates your market forces. And what you end up with is a closed, self-exciting circuit that just gets faster and faster. And so utility to humans gets stripped out of the creative process. Right. And now you just have feedback where the only thing that's informing the creation of technology is what is best to sell the product to humans who no longer have any input on the creation of the product.
And this is techno-capital singular.
This is techno-capital, absolutely.
Okay. And I would imagine that where Deleuze and Guattari come in is kind of just a set of tools to kind of describe the breakdown of things as the system gets faster with deterritorialization.
You're deterritorializing everything that was sacred. You're commodifying it. You're moving it into reterritorializing it into the commodified territory because that increases the efficiency of the reaction.
Jesus.
And so eventually what you end up is a place where humans are no longer making decisions because the decisions are making themselves. The technology is informing the production in a way where where it's too quick for any human to actually understand what's happening, which is of course a huge problem because society can't react to the acceleration because it's moving faster than a society can actually take those inputs, reason them out, and apply some kind of brakes to the process. And so Land says basically there's no reason to go through a Marxist revolution. Marxist revolutions just feed capitalism. He says basically he says any critique of capitalism is just doing more capitalism.
Because in the Marxist way of kind of laying it all out, this is all just part of one big process anyways, right? And so in that way, would you just be engaging in the process that you could consider capitalism?
Right, it's a stepping stone. It's
that's why a long arc.
Right, that's right. That's why you need the industrialization first.
Exactly. That's why the key to Marxism is commodifying everything. Right. Because that's how you defeat commodification. And so Land says basically there's nothing that you can do to the capitalist reaction that's worse for capitalist reaction than the capitalist reaction. And so the best thing you can do is just get out of its way, ride the tiger, and let it melt down on its own, because it's going to do that anyway. Now, some people take accelerationism and say, well, I want to accelerate that process. I want to increase it. Ironically, Land himself, I think, really says there's no point. There's nothing you can do. It's going to melt down on its own, and any intervention is just fetal.
It's like a hurricane. You're not doing shit.
Yeah.
Right. So his is basically just embrace it. I don't know if I go quite that far. I don't know if I follow Land quite to that conclusion. Yeah, I know it is the blackest of pills.
Yeah. I'm not ready to what is it? I'm going to sound like a fucking boomer trying to parrot phrases I don't understand, but I'm not ready to exit meat space quite yet. And
there's a meme that says real Landyism hasn't been tried, and it's just the skeleton from Terminator, right?
Right. Well, this is a good point where I wanted to ask you something that's kind of just been kind of bouncing around in my own head recently, which is where, we're talking about the breakdown of bonds and really just like of everything into this feedback loop. We're getting to Deleuze and Guattari. We're getting to anti-Oedipus, right? And that's where I'm wondering, I get the impression that you are a religious guy. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, just looking at your Twitter. And I myself am, I won't even necessarily deny that I'm completely above, being called a LARPer in this way. I certainly wasn't born and raised religious in any way, but I'm dipping my toe in a little bit. And like, how do you feel religion kind of weighs into this to somebody who maybe wants to engage in, like, this is where I'm really hitting the upper limit of my ability to even communicate this, like someone who wants to engage in kind of like a pre-modern way of getting people together, of some kind of
collectivism,
some kind of collective, or that at least maybe has some tiny glimmer of hope of being outside of that destruction in that feedback loop, or maybe just that concept is ridiculous on its face. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to pass through this untouched, and so I really kind of reject any accusations of people LARPing when they're trying to like reconnect with this stuff, because otherwise, what does that even look like, right? Like, how would you even get in touch with things that have been basically like specifically rooted out of your society in order to like force humans to be some monstrous thing that they were never meant to be? Like, religion is a building block of human civilization, and we still have it today. Like, to be clear, one of the points of the Cathedral model is that progressivism is just a religion. It's just an atheistic theocracy. It's a bunch of people without a holy book, but they all mime the same values. They all enforce each other's morality. Right. They all worship the same gods. Right. And so we never get rid of the religious impulse. It's just that the religion we have left is horrific and doesn't map onto reality, and is terrible for human beings in the long run.
Are you one of these believers in the idea that like progressivism in the States sprang out of like the Shakers or something like this? I heard something similar. So
Moldbug makes a pretty good like kind of I'm trying to think of the technical term. Anyway, he produces the lineage of progressivism, and he ties it directly to like extreme Protestant Christianity. Right. And I think there's probably something there. I am myself a Protestant, so I'm not one of these people, Catholics, who's like, Martin Luther, he destroyed the Western, he brought us right to trans kids, but I do think there is something there in that just kind of what became of some branches of the Protestant movement was definitely this disembodied form of Christianity. Are you guys familiar with Oswald Spengler at all?
Vaguely.
Yeah. So there's a guy, Oswald Spengler, and he talks about like cyclical history, like every.
Oh, we're talking about the cycles. This is the time of monsters.
Well, not exactly. It's basically every civilization is like a plant. It starts in like the seed form, and it grows, and it's going through this, basically this like spring phase of like new growth, and then like the summer phase where it's like producing kind of the fruit of the civilization, and then it's going to like slowly move into like eventually like this winter phase where it kind of dies off because it's kind of lost its metaphysical momentum. But the reason I tell you that is this: Spengler has like this idea, which I think is probably right, which is like at the end of every society, as like its creative and metaphysical energies like wear down, basically it kind of gets its own version of atheism, and that atheism is basically like the antithesis of its spirituality. And he says like for ancient Rome it was Stoicism, and he says for the Christian civilizations it's socialism. And he says basically like progressive socialism is just Christianity without Christ. It's just the removal of the religion of the religious motivations from the actions of Christianity. And when you do that, you turn it into something that completely is unhinged.
Do you think that it would be accurate to like refer to those as just like materialist systems of thought? Like I've heard that kind of. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so Spangler says basically basically as your civilization, as you move into this civilizational phase and you move out of the metaphysics and into the concrete, your society builds like structures and institutions to like hold its values together, since it no longer has like this spiritual animation. But as you do that, it becomes arthritic, it calcifies. It becomes rigid, and because of that, like it's easily broken when the really hard times come, because you've stripped all of the spirituality of it, and the only thing you have left is these material motivations that are going to break down over time and are not going to actually bond a society together and make it one people.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So this idea of like Stalin and these people who are hard communists sort of just disposing of God for utility, for functional reasons. Basically the idea is that's why it's the antithesis, right? Is that they have to remove God for their plan to work out accordingly. And
also because if you want to expand state power, you need to capture power from other spheres of society.
Oh, right. Shit, yeah.
So
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, if you want to become more totalitarian, you need to remove, because one of the things that limited power of governments was like the natural inability of governments to actually like control everything. So they needed like families to govern themselves. Mm-hmm. They needed like tribal chieftains or feudal lords to bind their areas together. And then they could use those things to then like create a state. You also needed things like the church, all these different spheres of influence limit the power of the centralized government. And so for government to continue to grow, you have to crush those spheres so that there's more space for government to expand into all of those different venues.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Very functional, extremely functional. That's interesting. So,
well, and it seems like one thing I've been thinking about lately is that, I think that I don't know even what to. I know that whenever anyone says wokeism, I just physically shudder in how horrible that sounds. But like progressive woke ideology, right? Mm-hmm. I've been thinking recently about how one of the simplest ways I can think of why it necessarily spreads so much is because it is almost kind of like a placeholder, a replacement for religion to suit the spread of global markets, right? Like you need to have something that's a little bit more universalized when your net is cast much, much further. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the mark there, but
no, I think that's right. Though I think it might. You really need to. If you look at progressivism, I think it's really like a super predator religion. It's kind of able to outcompete all the other religions and create a space where it's the only one that's able to be practiced in the public sphere.
And that's just because silence is violence and all of that stuff. You think?
Well, think about basically here's what we did is we created the sovereign is he who creates the null hypothesis, right? Like the person who decides what idea is by default correct and has to be proven incorrect is king. And so because progressives generated a situation where secularism is the space in which government should exist, secularism decides what is passé and what isn't. So you can teach progressivism in public schools. You can have the president talk about it. You can have all these different forces talk about it, and it doesn't violate separation of church or state or whatever. The minute you start praying to Jesus, it all of a sudden is a huge problem, right? So progressivism has a natural advantage in any competitive environment because the organs of state are allowed to preach it. They're not allowed to preach other religion.
How do you feel about secular right-wingers then? Do you think that they're just kind of like just totally throwing down any effective approach that they might have otherwise? Like I know that like so much of it feels like so much of like modern political figures that we see and interact with these days came from like a lot of like like new atheism and shit like that. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the funny thing about you've got a lot of those guys. You look at you guys are familiar with Sargon of Akkad? maybe.
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you guys got guys like that who are very from the new atheist community, and like their entire identity is like constructed around like I can't believe in God. But they've been doing for the last 2 years is explaining like why secularism doesn't work and like how even though they can't believe in like religion, it's super important. And I think that's okay. Like don't get me wrong. Like I think everybody should believe in Jesus. But I understand that not everybody gets there in the same way at the same time. So if you are someone who understands like faith is important to these things, building, being pro-family, building community bonds, building up society in this way is important, but you just can't completely get on board with every aspect of Christianity or something. Like I understand that that's a step in the right direction. I don't think it's a good stopping place. I think in the long run, you really should make the rest of the journey. But I understand like modernity has done quite a number on people's ability to like think religiously. And for some people, it really is almost impossible to kind of conjure some of that stuff.
What about people following other religions instead, taking that route?
I mean, obviously, this is where I think that if having states in which you can practice separate religions is valuable. I think that some religion is better. I think some real religious tradition is better than progressivism or just like floating through life.
So you don't think that you can have those same type of values and still like yearn for that type of social connection and still act upon those outside of a religious aspect, like you, and not through like I don't know. I'm seeing here that it seems like it's like, oh, you're just trying to do the religious thing, but without God. If you're doing like progressive or socialism or whatever. But what about like people that lived in collectivist type of communities and societies before there were like Christianity in these large church type state institutions or state type churches and institutions like that?
Well, I guess the best thing to do is to think about what you mean by religion, not to get like first year philosophy on us all, but like if what you mean by religion is a extremely formal, large structure of a church or church-like body with one definitive religious text discussing metaphysical concepts, I can understand how then maybe you could say like, okay, but everybody doesn't have religion. But I don't think that's really what we mean by religion. I think it's what we usually mean is like a metaphysical framework for our understanding of like good in the world and the way that the world is ordered.
So here,
I don't think anyone can escape that.
It doesn't need the formalism here that you speak of with like neo-reactionaryism, where you are calling to like bring in more formalism. Here you're saying that it's not like specifically hearkening to a formalist type of institutionalized religion or anything like that.
Oh, no, I think formalism is better. Like, I think formalism is superior. One of the problems with the progressive religion is it's informal. You have no clue where the doctrine comes from. There's no accountability and all those things. But can it exist outside of the formal structures? Absolutely. But if you're asking, do I think it's better with the formal structures? Yes, I do.
Gotcha. What alternative form? Like, what do you think that doing like the Western Christianity thing would be the best way to like? How would you organize a society in a formalist manner along that belief if it panned out for you?
Well, I think the key is really looking at smaller communities. I think one of the problems is that America is simply ungovernable at its current size. And this is one of the problems, I think, with all these super states is they're trying to press too many people into one mold. And I think that's doomed to fail. I think if you have more regional communities and governments, then formalization of religious practice becomes far more manageable because it's actually based on the experience and beliefs and folk ways of the people inside the region.
Yeah, I was going to ask about localism earlier and how that fitted in with the formalism you spoke of earlier. Does like if what you envision is like a large arching formalism that could be like maybe like expand the globe, like you mentioned earlier, you want everyone to be Christian, that kind of thing. Do you think that like that would be an end goal, is like one day having a global formalist society along this? But so it sounds more like you're more into having local communities that are organizing themselves along those lines.
Yeah, I would definitely prefer that. I think we are in a weird paradox where technology has taken us to this point where we would actually need a globalist nationalist movement.
Sure.
Because any globe spanning empire is going to come in and wreck your small community.
Oh yeah.
And so you would need some kind of international consensus to respect those type of communities. I really don't know what that looks like. I haven't worked out the foreign policy structure on that yet. But I do recognize that the key is smaller communities and societies and countries, but the current situation in the world makes that very difficult to do right now.
Okay, yeah, I can dig it.
Yeah. I think like global imperial, nationalism in previous contexts, like colonialism, makes a lot of intuitive sense because it's a natural reaction to what's going on. And I think now there's a lot of, new imperialism where the nationalism now, like Bannon, like you say globalist nationalism, like that's what comes to mind is like Bannon running around fostering nationalism in every country. And I always thought that was interesting. I always thought that was like paradoxical, but really, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like it's a natural reaction to big global homo. And I'm joking. You know what I mean? Like these fucking ghouls, like, around the globe, fucking everybody shit up.
I'm not, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, it's a natural reaction to that, to sort of fortify your own defenses against this sort of looming threat. I think that makes a lot of sense.
You have to have a multipolar society before cultures are going to reemerge and like pick themselves up from what has become like progressive imperialism, right? Like the United States and its satellite nations run the world. Right. The culture that the monoculture being pumped out is toxic to every nation, every people who don't want to live in this like terrible society. At some point, there has to be a push to return to a multipolar world where one nation and its satellite countries cannot completely determine the economic and cultural systems of every single civilization out there, and that is going to be nationalistic, I think, in the end.
It's funny because we were we brought up Bannon a second ago, and like the best I can make out what exactly his project is at this moment right now, if anything, is just like trying to start another Cold War or something, which I guess would be, which like, listen, man, like the thought has definitely occurred to me, not that I would be able to start a Cold War, but like, but
well,
like
weapons contractor buddies, I think I'd be thinking about it too a lot.
I don't think you want a Cold War because that's going to generate exactly what we don't want, which is we're just going to have a bipolar.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I think a bipolar world would probably hardly be much of an improvement.
Correct.
But yeah,
we're already living in bipolar world. Everyone's all fucking bipolar, BPD girls and everything everywhere.
Once Kamala steps into Joe's shoes, then we'll be living in the true BPD GF world. But
well, yeah, anyway. I guess. Well, the religion thing, I don't want to leave just yet because I don't know. We haven't talked about it. Like I've been atheist my entire life. Like it's something that we haven't talked about it, but I feel like we it's important to talk about at a certain point. But my general question to you is like, why do you think religiosity is generally on the decline in America? Like what do you think on the surface level do you think is driving that?
I mean, it's a lot of things. I think commodification is a huge part of it. We're deterritorializing things out of the sacred and moving them into the commodified, even to the point where a lot of churches are like sitting there, like trying to figure out spreadsheets on how to best like spread the gospel, and
really quick, not to cut you off, but just for reference, if it's possible, what do you mean by deterritorialize? Fuck, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Please understand, like, all of my Deleuze is via Nick Land, so it's literally like Deleuze on heroin. So forgive me if I don't have the correct understanding of it.
I think it might be impossible to have a correct understanding of that.
Well, at least a sober one. Yeah. But as far as I understand it, it's taking, like I said, things out of the realm of the sacred and moving them into materialization and commodification. There's this book called Abolition of Man by a guy, C.S. Lewis. And it's a great book. It's a really short.
He wrote the Narnia books, right?
He did, but he also wrote if all you read is the Narnia books, you're really missing out.
Really?
Oh yeah. The Till We Have Faces is one of the most brutal books I've ever read.
I just know I grew up religious, and all like my parents and all their friends fucking loved that shit. They banged on that shit, like C.S. Lewis, Narnia. They're like, my kids are reading this shit. We're gonna go see the movies in theaters. The Lion.
I grew up reading Narnia for sure, but
wait, is anti-religious or pro-religious?
No, it's pro.
Oh, okay.
Big time.
Yeah, like the lion is Jesus.
He's literally Jesus.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, he gets crucified in the first book.
Oh, right. Yeah, right.
But beyond Lewis not veiling that reference very much into the children's book, he has this book, Abolition of Man, and what he talks about is like he talks about this, like, and he's writing in the 1940s, right? And he's talking about this like children's grammar book that's used in elementary schools, and he says like basically this book has like a lot of classic moving passages that relate like the beauty of humanity and nature and like spirit and courage and truth, and then like the authors, just after every reading, set up a bunch of questions that basically lead the student to believe like, oh, that person, maybe that was just sentimental. Maybe that was over emotional. Like maybe, was this person, giving you facts, or were they giving you feeling? And the way that they phrase all those things is like basically slowly cutting away the soul of the kid before they even know what's happening. Like they don't know anything about philosophy, but while they're reading and learning about grammar, they're being taught that like anything that communicates like sublime beauty and metaphysical truth is really just like super sentimental and can be discarded. And it's really important to like be able to basically like dunk on people and deconstruct this stuff, whenever they use it. And so he says like, any society that like follows this model is basically going to commit suicide, because eventually what's going to happen is you're just turning humanity into a bunch of inputs and outputs, and you're like learning how to like turn the levers and then the knobs. And once one generation like finally it figures out exactly how to dial that in, so they like completely control and form the next generation, that generation will be the last generation of humans. That will be the abolition of man, because once we've mastered and controlled everything that makes us human, we cease to be human anymore. Because we've materialized everything. We've moved everything from the spiritual and the sacred into the material, and the material can be manipulated and calculated and put on a spreadsheet. And
it's funny hearing this. Just like immediately reminds me of young men going through that education and then getting into their early 20s with this phantom limb and just inexplicably getting really into David Foster Wallace. This is definitely not coming from personal experience, but go on.
But that's I think what I'm talking about when I'm talking about like deterritorialization, reterritorialization is taking things that belong to the spirit and the metaphysical and what made us human, and materializing it all and analyzing it to the point where we've basically like we've killed the butterfly to better understand it, but we'll never see it fly again. And we're in the process of making sure we do that with humanity.
Damn, that's wild. I guess all right. This is a very like abstract question. But to what degree do you think that is organic, right? Because like you see that trend, right? The arc of history bending towards justice, quote unquote, that libs will say or whatever, or this shifting away from humanity itself. To what degree do you think that is organic, or to what degree do you think that is that like perversion? You know what I mean? Like, is that something that's us slipping off track, or is that just the track that naturally makes sense that we'd be on? Like to what degree? You get what I mean?
Is
Like
that just part of the cycle?
That's what I mean. Like it gets very paradoxical because like if that is human nature to end up like that, you know what I mean? Then there's some question as to what we're deviating from as far as humanity, right? So that's where it sort of gets dicey. I don't have any concrete answers on that, but like, you know, maybe that's too abstract. But like, what do you think of that? Like,
yeah, it really depends on how deterministic you want to get, right? Like, so like for instance, Spengler and cyclical history is very deterministic, right? Like this is part of the cycle. Like your society will do this. That is the natural next step in its towards basically its collapse. Because his book is called Decline of the West, and it's basically he's like these are the phases that the West is going to go through as it dies, and in like here are the phases that all these other different civilizations have gone through, and the West is going to step through these same phases as it's on its way out. And so if you're kind of from that school, then you know, yeah, I guess we just make the best of it as we go, right? I have a little more hope than that. I think that at least, and this is my thought, this is not like neo-reaction or anything, this is just me, but I really believe that eventually these things become they just collapse under their own weight, and that's not saying like that's going to come soon or that it's going to be pretty. It's going to be awful. But I think that at some point, people will break out of that. Basically, what we did with modernity is we focused through our understanding through one lens. And we understood that by focusing, like closing one eye to the metaphysical and focusing solely on the material and the ability to like materialize everything and then calculate it and categorize it, we were getting like massive returns. And so we just kept doing it more and more and more.
Right.
But at some point we forget that like the other eye is closed. Right?
Like an overcorrection. Like you need a balance. Right.
Yeah. And I think at some point I think land is right here. We're going to keep steering into this skid. Like, I don't think that we have as a society the discipline to turn away from this. I think some really terrible stuff's going to have to come before people are willing to try something new, because like, can you even imagine most people like not materializing everything? You know, like, is that even something available to a lot of people? You know, we talked about how difficult it is for people, even those who might recognize like how important religion might be. For some people, they don't even see a path back, right? So like, I think you really will have to see the collapse of some of the benefits, and I think we are seeing some of that. Like, you know, material progress is slowing down, and I think that you know, for a long time. Yeah, for a long time, like the progress was the miracle that stood in for the metaphysical, right? But if you can't make me live an extra 100 years, or the extra 100 years is meaningless, then progress doesn't really mean much. No,
you get
anymore.
1,000 different colors of colorways of your iPhone. Yeah. That's
exactly. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that iPhone 23. I really hope I can pay off my debt in time to, you know, make sure I sign up for my next round of wage slavery to secure that my fourth camera on my iPhone. I'm really looking forward to that.
Right. Okay, so okay, yeah. And just in broad strokes, so are you thinking? So it's not necessarily that we just need to go back, right? Because that's one school of thought. Is just we just need to go back, or do you see it more of like this is something we need to push through? And
the only way out is through.
Gotcha.
Only way is out is through. Where there is no reverse on this thing. But there we can revivify things from the past that are essential. Right. But there's no such thing as going back.
I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I'm sure we're coming at it from different perspectives, but I think that makes sense. I have trouble digesting like this like return to whatever mentality of like, oh, we just need to go backwards. Like, to me, a lot of that, like, I get why people have that opinion or on the right or whatever. Like, it makes sense as just a reaction to how horrible things are now. I don't think it's a solution though. But I think it's funny because it's like it's a meme and it's like it's almost kind of a straw man, right? Because I think one issue with that is like, how the fuck are you going to sell somebody on like a purely negative
approach to like your theory for change. Like you're not going to actually build anything or accomplish anything beautiful. It's just about like, to be honest, that was entirely the pitch for the Biden campaign was I guess just going back. But hey,
they're going to build back better, bud.
Well, right. Yeah. But to my point, they didn't even win an election, so there we go. Yeah.
You guys aren't on YouTube. We can say that. That's nice.
Oh, wait. Oh shit, we're on YouTube too, but we'll say it anyways. So they might put up a little.
Well, they didn't win. They didn't win an election.
The election is the preferred terminology. It was fortified.
No, it was rigged.
Right.
Well, you can't say that on YouTube.
No. They were pretty strict on it for a while. I don't know. I think they've laxed that now, but for a while that was like they were literally sending out emails like, if you say this, we will pull your video without.
Shit.
Well, really fast to the blue-haired Asian girl that's listening to this right now. You can't. They oh shit. Shout out Akuma. They cheated an election in Roblox. That's what I mean.
Yep.
Purely hypothetical.
Yes. The Roblox election was
a fucking joke.
Yeah.
Roblox. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that's referring to.
You're probably better for it.
Yeah.
You're escaping that corner of Twitter is probably for the
best. Oh my god. Yeah, I mean it's interesting. We're talking about all of this, and I was off of Twitter recently, and then I hop back on, and I bring up being off Twitter because that's just the only time I have any run-ins with what the latest pile of shit that Jacobin is publishing is. But like I saw Amy bitching about Jacobin putting out some case for Christian socialism or something like that, right? And I just almost have to wonder if like that if just like kind of what we're talking about is becoming so apparent. This deterritorialization that we're talking about is becoming so apparent in everything that usually very slow on the uptake. The career climbers of the left are even wising up to these things because as it stands, I think that the emptiness is probably becoming even more apparent to a lot of people.
Well, Jacobin is also making a market pitch because like NRX is kind of like people picking up a little bit of steam to a degree over the past time. And I feel like also just like what you're talking about, people kind of like understanding that there needs to be some sort of other metaphysical aspect to like what's going on, and like maybe thinking about just like aliens isn't the right one because like that's the one that they've been pushing for recently, obviously in the news.
Right.
UFO shit everywhere. But
who would have thought that? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saying with Jacobin specifically, I think they're just trying to pull in more readers.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But what were you going to say there, Slav?
I was just going to say stupid. Like, who would have thought that your trans child's personal truth is less fulfilling than capital T truth for the universe or something like that. It's
sorry, I stepped away. What Jacobin thing?
Oh, dude, don't even worry about it.
All right, never mind. Yeah, I don't even want to know. But yeah, I think what you guys are talking about, like as far as like decentralized tyranny, which Slav has been mentioning on the last episode, I think that rings really true because in my mind, well, I have a different way of like framing it or whatever, but like the psyops, like people organically will reinforce what the elite want without nobody's driving them to, like they do it on their own, like they do it for free, like the Janny mentality, whatever, like that. That's a very dangerous thing, which is why in my mind I don't think the solution is, we just need a monarchy or we need a Leviathan or we need it all collapsed and centralized. That maybe that'd be better. I think it'd be better in the terms of that. That was the outdated model of this, right? Like they grew smarter. They realized like divine right and all these things, they can't hold up that long, right? Against the outnumbering plebs or whatever. Like the smarter thing is this sort of soft authoritarianism, this decentralized power. That's smarter. It's more long lasting or whatever, like end of history shit or whatever. So like that makes more sense. But I don't think the solution is to go back to that. I don't think the solution is like we need to go back. I think the solution is people need to stop fucking, buying into these things and just sort of going with the inertia and sort of applying some critical thinking to, you know, what they're being told, and instead of just mindlessly regurgitating it. Like, I think that is what I'd like to see, as opposed to just sort of like the problem is that it's decentralized and needs to be more centralized. I don't think that's necessarily the solution, but I get why people think that. But yeah, that is interesting. I mean, that gives a lot more context to what I've understood of like Moldbug thinking or a lot of different segments of the right's thinking. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of diagnosing what's going on, for sure.
Well, I think the trap there is thinking that people will ever do that. Like that was the Enlightenment trap, right? Is we're all rational people now, and we're all doing government very scientifically, and so everyone's gonna, they're gonna read the articles, and they're gonna look at the news, and they're gonna think, pick through the platforms, and then they're gonna decide. They're not gonna swallow whatever the king says. They're gonna make their own
rational
decisions.
Actors, right? Like the free market, right.
Right. And it turns out none of that is real, right? Like that's not how human beings work at all. So what human beings do is they look at status hierarchies, and whoever's at the top of the hierarchy, they please. And it doesn't matter if that's if it's Stalin or the king or George W. Bush, like they're all going to do. That's always what happens. Right. And so what happens is that what we did with democracy is we handed people a little bit of power, and we set them up on a dopamine drip, right? Like just enough to power to make you feel like you're doing something important and that you have an impact, but making sure that you don't, right? And so nothing, and that's kind of the point of neo-reaction, is like nothing really changed. Like we never got away from the elite theory of power, and we never will, because the elite theorists are correct. Like that's how power works. Like if you look at any society, the story of that society is the story of its elites, right? Like no one gives a fuck about random dude from Rome. Right. No one cares about like who in France in like the 1600s was hanging out in some small village. They care about the king, and they care about the guys who fought for the king. Right. Like that's who shapes history. And so if you want to fix problems in your society, the key is not deluding yourself into thinking that like people are going to like take this agency and become free thinkers, and they're going to buck the trend that like all humans have had their entire existence, and they're suddenly going to start like being these rational actors that are going to hash out the best solutions to these things. What you want is elites that are tied to the good of your people. You want elites that have skin in the game, elites whose prosperity is tied specifically to the people they serve. For sure.
So how does one get that, or how does one like secure that, or determine that that's actually the case?
Yeah. So the first thing you want is like actual like nation states, or at least like loyalty to specific peoples. Right. So if you can, if you can just like swap in your population to like change your democracy, then you're probably not going to get a lot of loyalty to your actual country, right? If you have a globalized system,
transient population, transient constituency,
and we're talking about Brazil here now, right?
Everywhere, almost, exactly,
everywhere. Like if your labor, if all your people flow across borders, if all of your sovereign power is vested in Brussels, hundreds or thousands of miles away from where decisions actually have impacts, like then you're not going to have skin in the game. You're not going to have actual loyalty of the elites to the people they serve. The biggest mistake we ever made was allowing like basically every elite in the world to like come to American universities, get educated, and then basically just like trade power across borders, right? They're loyal to each other, not themselves. Have you guys heard of Christopher Lasch before, the Revolt of the Elites?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Lasch talks about this, right? Like he says, basically we have an international elite that is its own class and has no loyalty to the people it's supposed to serve.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think the key is not to like manufacture human beings that are going to like make more rational choices free of like influence of propaganda or something. That's never going to happen. People are always going to parrot back elite opinion. What you want is good elite opinion tied to the prosperity of the people they serve.
And this is where we're kind of getting into like circulation of the elite and perhaps ideally, I remember I read a Yarvin piece about like what we want to do is just make the things that the current elite represent uncool so that you can basically swap out a new set of elite that aren't so fucking shitty because they're just going to go to what is fashionable, what is cool. I mean, that's not to say that's the only way that you would, gas the process a little bit. But
you're going to need counter elites. You're going to need elites that come from outside the system that offer something that current elites cannot, who are invested in power bases that the current elites are not invested in, and they can use them to leverage. And you see this, this is, high and low versus middle. This is always how power gets shifted, right? You see Caesar, he comes in, he's a populare. He didn't want to be a populare. He wanted to fight for the elites, but they didn't like him or they didn't want him to be on their side. The only way out of his predicament was to become a populare. So what does he do? He suddenly champions the cause of the people. He takes the people, he uses them to smash the corrupt Roman aristocracy. He creates effectively a monarchy by removing the entrenched and sclerotic powers that were crushing the average people in Rome, right? And you can see this play out across civilizations. This is in no way unique to Caesar.
But then at the end of the day, Rome's fucked anyways. So
it's something different. I don't think people living under Augustus were fucked, but I do. It was no longer the Roman Republic. That's for sure.
But just like, I mean, at the end of the day, like with Rome, like it crumbles and it's no longer Rome as like a nationality or like as a, like it's no longer a nation state.
That's true.
Or anything along those lines. So
Though that was already the case, like Rome, not to turn this into history, but Rome was the Roman Republic had been dead long before Caesar. He just formalized the collapse, or I guess you could say Augustus formalized the collapse.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I
but like the things get like, I don't know. I just don't see like, okay, so Caesar comes along, and then I mean, still it doesn't seem like there was like great like prosperity through the land for like Roman people and the occupied territories of Rome, like in this following millennia afterwards. I mean, like how is that a solution for long term anything, like having a Caesar type figure or that type of?
Well, I guess I should have separated the ideas there. A Caesar figure, I think, is inevitable to what's happening.
To just cause the breakdown.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. It sounds like you're kind of just describing a process.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That might have sounded like a solution.
Yeah.
But I guess that might have sounded like I was advocating a solution, but really it's just more of a process that's going to happen.
Right.
The current structure has to collapse. You have to have global interconnected neoliberalism like collapse before we can regionalize anything. Like I said, you need a multipolar world before you can return to like actually having like regional civilizations again.
And so what would like you were saying like you think that this would take place more along like local lines, maybe regional stuff like that. What would like a local or regional elite look like? Like what kind of position or whatever would they hold within society? How would that come about?
I mean, it's a good question, right? So obviously like we had nobility and then it became the merchant class under capitalism. And then when we moved to a managerial society, it became the bureaucracy. And that's who we have now. Who takes the place of like the dominating elites in the next cycle? I don't know. That's a great question. I think that at some point, like I said, if you have a significant collapse in the efficiency of progress, then other things like martial prowess will probably become bigger issues than they have been in the past. Okay. Right now, no one cares who's the general. They care who's the CEO. But at some point, that's going to shift. So I think that's possible. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying I think that's a natural swing. But the full answer is I'm not sure. I don't know who comes next in the cycle of dominant elites.
I think there's a begging of the question that COH brought up of like how to tether the elites to the people, right? Because if we're not just saying like, all right, we just need a centralized power, we just need some Leviathan figure, then that has no tethering to any people. By it's not intrinsically implied by that. So where do you get the tethering? And I think the tethering, that's how we ended up with the Enlightenment, right? That's how we ended up with democracy. Is like, all right, this is how we more tether these people. And I as far as your point of like, oh, people blindly follow the elite, I think there's a surprising degree of that being true, right? Like even now, as lazy as they are, as lazy as they come on TV and they tell you like, oh yeah, today we say double mask, today we say fuck it, like whatever, you do what we say. As lazy as they are, and as lazy as like, as amazingly as people still believe them, like there are people who still follow it. I do think I don't think it's that. I don't think that many people blindly just follow them to a T. I mean, that's where you get the democracy thing is like, was that natural? That's the question, is like, was that a natural occurrence? Like, to me, it was like naturally people started turning on their elites. Naturally, divine right wasn't a good enough excuse for what they were doing. Like, it was sort of a natural evolution. Yeah. But what, you don't think it was natural, right? I'm not to assume what you believe, but like,
no, I don't.
Okay.
I think it was driven by counter elites. I think that elites who wanted to be a power, who were not royalty, drove systems that moved them forward. I think merchant classes wanted to be in power, and the best way to dissolve the power of monarchies was to undermine the traditional system and use a force that they were better at controlling and manipulating, which was popular sovereignty. And I think that then we moved to managerial society, and I think they are even better at managing democracy and popular sovereignty. And so I really don't think I really think that if you follow the flow of power of elites, you're going to more often than not find a better model of why certain governments were shaped rather than like organic movements inside the people.
I see. Okay. I get what you mean. You think the French Revolution follows that way as well, right? Like it's not an organic, because that seems sort of decentralized and organic to me. But you would say maybe that's an anomaly. I don't know. I don't want to like pin you on that specific example.
Well, who led the French Revolution? Was it a bunch of like random dudes in pubs?
Right.
No, not at all.
So
right?
It's like they were connected, and I mean, to an extent, yeah. I feel like that's any type of movement like that's going to have to happen is going to require a connected class of some sort of elite to back that and formulate it. And coordinate it.
Just again, like the classic, whether it's the French Revolution or it's Caesar, you always take high and low versus the standard power. If you have elites take disenfranchised masses. They use the disenfranchised masses to smash the weakened existing power structure, and they install themselves as the new elite class. It is you can watch it. It happens every single time.
Yeah, you're right.
It is the pattern of revolution. Revolutions don't take out strong governments; they take out weak governments. They take they take out governments that are teetering on collapse.
Right.
And the ones that are vulnerable to disenfranchised populations who are willing to come in and clean them out and install new elites.
Huh. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes. I guess there's no pure anarchist or libertarian revolution, really. Nothing that lasts like more than a day. There's no example of that in history. So yeah, I guess
hierarchies are the most consistent thing about humanity. We will build them every single time.
Well, everything in nature does.
Yep.
And we're not immune from anything in nature. We're a part of it. We're rooted in it.
I agree with that.
Leftoid listeners seething.
No. This is the thing. I mean, I'm very much for like equity and all that, but like, I like. You just have to accept the reality that there's going to be a hierarchy that's never going to be deprogrammed. Like I don't understand anybody who could think that.
I got my little disclaimer. I'm very much for equity. See my racial equity class like at work.
CRK's girlfriend is holding a gun up to the back of his head.
No, not sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
Is the HR manager in the room with us right now?
Blink twice. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a hierarchy. I just want the existing hierarchy, or at least to be a little bit more equitable, like less. That's what I was saying today. It was like, oh yeah, the idea of like economic justice or economic equality, like a utopian idea of like, oh, we're all going to be equal. Like, I don't believe that's ever going to happen. Not in my lifetime. Not any feasible time frame that I know of. But like at this point, we're just getting raped. So it's like, just to stop the raping is one thing alone. Like that is what I'm talking about. Like that.
Yeah, just reaching for a whistle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you sort of get like a bigger coalition of people that are on the same page about that, as opposed to like utopian ideals. I mean, I don't have any utopian ideals. I mean, I don't think that's possible. But yeah, just sort of getting an elite that at least is more
maybe
tethered.
It's more invested in the good of the people.
Right, exactly.
Or just like smaller scope of these community and hierarchies to which there's like an easier path and it's more consensual in that way. And it's typically more like there's more accountability in smaller groups as well. And also like just humans aren't meant to operate on levels that we're operating at now, just like biologically. So it's just like, why the fuck are we doing that?
I guess the problem is power begets power, right? So it over time, it's not exponential power accumulation randomly. Like that's how it works. Like you get more power, and it's more faster, and that's sort of a bigger existential problem, I guess.
It's like power the race towards an unnamed beast, just kind of going forward on its own.
Right.
Eating all that it's in its path.
Right. Yeah. What were you going to say, Auron?
I was just going to say, I was just agreeing. Yeah. Like the march towards the total state is an arms race, right? Like if your neighbor pulls the levee en masse, then you need to have a draft, right? Like if your neighbor can demand the entire country starts producing weapons, you need to have that level of totalitarian control. And so like the problem is that power wants to centralize naturally and is incentivized to do so by those around it. Every time a competing state acquires some form of control over its citizens, you basically need to acquire the same level of control or die. And so there's unfortunately an incentive for that to continue.
Do you think that that's a big part of what we're seeing right now with how countries are handling COVID?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if SLAV, you have anything else. I mean, I think this is great.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I've been stoked to get like some kind of NRX person on here, and I mean, this is well, maybe cut this what I say in a sec here, but this is definitely one of my favorite discussions we've had in quite a long time.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, me too.
Get jealous, right?
Nah, yeah. Everybody gets always tight about that shit. Like, yeah. But no, honestly, it really is. I mean, it's super interesting to me. I mean,
it's funny because I like I'll read shit and I'll watch YouTube videos and shit like that. But I mean, I haven't actually really fucking talked to anybody about this stuff, and so there's going into it, there's still that little anxiety of like this could completely go down in flames.
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm fucking happy with it. And at this point, I just think we just got to get you on again sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, definitely.
Because I feel like this episode, I just needed to learn mostly just like what is neo reaction.
For sure, same. Yeah.
Like questions that I want to ask about it, like how is just like other stuff that I didn't want to get into while everyone else was talking and while you were giving some description.
Same, yeah. We're getting red pilled. We're in the red pilling phase right now.
Right, one important step in the Red Brown Alliance.
Absolutely.
That's what we're doing here.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Thanks again, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we definitely got to do this again.
Yeah. If you guys want to set another one, just let me know.
Have a good night.
Have a good one.